When it comes to the economy, 2018 was a year Turkey would likely rather forget. Inflation hit a 15-year high during the year, and a diplomatic spat with the United States sent the Turkish lira spiralling to a record low against the dollar. The government has reassured the public, saying its initiatives and reforms will usher in a new year of stability for the country's finances. In part, that will be fueled by a strong export sector, which rose by more than 7% last year, and that growth is expected to continue in 2019. But some economists are still wary. Unemployment and inflation rates are still worryingly high, and the current account deficit sits well above $30 billion. To discuss Turkey's economic prospects in greater detail, I'm joined in the studio by Hatice Karahan, Senior Advisor to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Hatice, thank you for joining us on Straight Talk.
Thanks for inviting.
Now, we'll start with growth. 2018 wasn't necessarily a great year. The economy did struggle. The OECD has projected the Turkish economy will contract again in 2019, and the International Monetary Fund has slashed its growth forecast and predicted growth to slow to just 0.4%. What do you say to these predictions and the state of the Turkish economy looking ahead to 2019?
Sure. Well, triggered by the panic sparked in financial markets in the second half of last year, Turkey's economy entered a slowdown and balancing period. It was indeed a panic of a little substance and mostly political, but in the end we got exposed to the implications of a very well-known tie between psychology and economic behavior. Psychology is very critical for any economy, including Turkey. And it even sometimes leads to self-fulfilling prophecies. And it's an empirical fact all around the world that a major cause for economic accelerations or decelerations is the shifts in expectations in terms of optimism or pessimism. And that's what we went through as an unlucky period, which also coincided with the transition right after the general elections in the country.
So how do you shift that now to a state of optimism for 2019?
Yeah. Having said that, if we focus on the outlook for 2019, what I foresee is that we will proceed with a moderate growth rate. The rate projected in the new economic program is 2.3%, and it's expected to come mainly from net exports, the support of net export that has turned positive. And
that 2.3% is quite different to the 0.4% that the Monetary Fund is predicting.
Right.
Why do you think it's going to be better than what they predict?
Okay, so that's the question, and the answer lies at their pessimistic view or scenarios regarding domestic demand, because based on their scenarios, domestic demand in Turkey will contract sharply this year, but that's not our expectations because and also, let me emphasize this too, when you look at those reports and projections, it's also noted there that if domestic confidence is recovered more swiftly than assumed, then the growth rate would be stronger than projected. And that's what will happen, that's what we will see in the coming months. That's what I believe, because the efforts and policies of the governments in terms of injecting more confidence into the economy will continue in order to achieve the targets in the program. And I believe that improvement in the psychology of economic agents will play a key role here. And the upshot is that the Turkish economy will exhibit a moderate growth this year, which will also bring sustainability for the medium and long run. And that's how we will be easily talk about the potential of the economy, which is around 5% in the coming years.
Okay, you were talking about the economic program and the sort of restability of the economy. That feeds into inflation. It hit a 15-year high in October. We were looking at 25.24%. It's reduced somewhat now, but it is still hovering around that 20%.
Right.
What is your inflation target for 2019, and more importantly, how do you get there?
That's a good question. Yes, inflation had a peak in October, primarily as a result of a cost push price increase, but then ebbed down in the last 2 months of the year. So the CPI closed the year at around 20%, as you mentioned, and we expect it to climb down in this year. The target for the end of 2019 is 15.9%, and we aim to come back to single-digit levels by 2021. And the question is how we will achieve that. And
yes.
there are a few issues to underline in this respect. First of all, we should admit that the domestic demand is not expected to move at a fast pace for a while, and that's good news for the course of price stability for this year, because the moderate GDP growth targeted, which is 2.3%, is below the potential GDP growth, and that generates a negative output gap, and that supports our fight with inflation. Second of all, as the tension in the financial markets has subsided, the pass-through effect of the exchange rate is assumed to steadily reduce as well, especially in the second half of the year. Another dynamic which is supporting this year for the fight with inflation appears to be weakening commodity prices and energy prices in particular, which will be helpful for Turkey's story. And also a fundamental issue to emphasize here is that the government is determined to strengthen the coordination between monetary policy and fiscal policy this year. That's a fundamental for achieving price stability. And lastly, all in all, managing expectations will be a key part of the package to deal with the high inflation inertia in the economy. I think that will be a very critical aspect as usual.
One thing which would give Turkey's economy a big boost is a reshaping and an updating of the customs union agreement. It's been talked about for 2 years, but no action. What needs to change? How long is it going to take until we see an improvement to this agreement? And do you think there will be progress made when both parties come together in February?
Yeah. Well, the customs union agreement dates back to 1995, and it definitely needs a modernization.
The world's changed a lot since then.
Yeah, exactly. Both to get rid of the asymmetries it has to the disadvantage of Turkey, and also to enhance the bilateral relations by fulfilling the potential of both sides. So this need or this set of problems cannot be left unaddressed anymore, because it's a win-win case for both parties.
So why have they left it unaddressed?
Then again, the European Union has to remember the bilateral promises made in recent years. Let's remember the agreement made in 2016, the Turkey-EU agreement dated March 2016, which mainly addressed the migration crisis in the European Union. Both sides have undertaken specific obligations there, and the sides decided to end irregular Syrian migration from Turkey to the EU, and to achieve this joint goal, Turkey completed its mission, but had some disappointments in regards to the pledges received. So, and one of the relevant items of the package was the update of the customs union. So here we still expect the EU to do their proportion of the deal and move faster with the modernization process.
How confident are you that can happen, or at least begin to happen when discussions begin again in February?
Yeah. Because there are some positive developments as well. Diplomatic dialogues have accelerated lately, and it was stressed right after the 5th Reform Action Group meeting in December. As President Erdogan clearly stated once, this is a technical issue and cannot and should not be made a material of politics. So we see some steps towards the negotiation process, and I guess at the third high-level economic dialogue meeting in February, right after that, I expect to turn in new leaf.
Would be good to see. To what extent do external factors impact on Turkey's prosperity looking ahead into 2019? You've got some regional instability going on, simmering tensions in a trade war between US and China. What kind of concern do they cause for Turkey's economy?
Well, as a matter of fact, there are two main external channels that we can talk about. that has an impact on economic prosperity of any countries, including Turkey, and those are foreign trade and finance. As for foreign trade, Turkey's exports follow an upward trend lately, but export performance admittedly depends on global demand, and that's why we'll keep watching where the trade war between China and the US will lead to. There are various scenarios to consider, but it's among the possibilities that the conflict could reduce the global demand or slow down the global demand. However, even in that case, Turkey would be one of the countries that are least exposed to the conflict, to the trade war, and that's why I wouldn't expect any negative influence on the GDP of Turkey this year resulting from trade war. On the other hand, despite a high market diversification level of Turkey's exports, we still care about the demand in Europe because it's a big market for Turkey. That's why we'll be watching, we'll be paying attention to the economic developments in Europe, particularly the Brexit process itself. It might have some effects due to the uncertainties emerged.
Yes.
Apart from demand, price is obviously a part of the package, and the weak course expected for energy prices will be helpful for Turkey's story this year.
When we talk about the US, we can't ignore that there has been some diplomatic tensions over the last year. Things have obviously improved. Is an improved relationship with the United States good for Turkey's economy? Those two are intrinsically linked.
Yes, yes. Turkey and the U.S. have a long-standing, strong strategic alliance, and there might always be ups and downs between any in any relationships of any pair of countries, and that's what happened between Turkey and the U.S. lately. But what's critical here, I guess, is to focus on the long-term relationship, and for this purpose we have done our best to convey our expectations and disappointments to the U.S. in a constructive way, and we forged ahead together. And this process, what affected the markets was the panic, resulting from uncertainties, let alone some speculations, of course. But once the tension subsided, things went back to normal. Now we have a normalization, and I guess stronger relations will inevitably support stability in the markets. And of course, more economic cooperation, further economic cooperation. We have a big number of American companies here, and they're very happy with their performances. They came together with President Erdogan in Ankara a few months ago, and it was a great meeting for both sides, and they have very much committed to the Turkish market. And we see a big potential between our economies, and our new focus will be promoting new investments.
Well, there's a lot to look forward to in 2019.
Yes.
I think you're going to have a very busy year ahead of you.
I guess so.
Hatice Karahan, thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk.
Thank you.